Today I am sharing our very first adoption story, but this time I'm going to include details only our family knows. First, if you're new here, let me give you a little bit of background. So, Sean and I have 3 biological children, but we have no biological children together. Sean has 2 biological children and I have 1 biological child. They are in their 20s, they are gone, and they are adulting. We have 11 children that we have adopted from the foster care system. We do have a foster care placement, and we also right now are taking care of our granddaughter, who is only 1. Where this whole thing started is back in 2013, Sean and I were talking. I had always been very interested in doing foster care since I was like a teenager, and I asked him if he would be interested in doing it, and he ended up saying yes. Then we took the classes like at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, got licensed in February of 2014. 3 weeks later, we ended up getting our very first placement, which was Jade and Lily. Now, Jade had actually been in 2 foster homes before ours. So the foster home she was coming from, she had been there for almost about a year, but she had been in the system for a year. And then Lily, she was only 3 months old when she came to us. Jade was 3 years old. Lily was 3 months old. So Lily was new to the system, but that's because she was just born. They sit down with you and they ask you, do you want girls? Do you want boys? What kind of behaviors or medical things are you willing to take? What age ranges do you want? And they just asked us, are you interested in adoption? Or like, would you be open to it? And so we said yes. I think they do that because what they had said when they placed Jade and Lily with us was that they were looking for an adoptive home because it looked like it was going to termination and they didn't want to have to move them again. And that makes total sense. Like, I do not think that you should go into foster care with the mindset that you're 100% going to adopt. And we didn't go into it with that mindset. We went into it just with the mindset we were going to foster only. We hadn't even really considered adoption until they asked us. But then once they asked us, we were like, yeah, we'd be open to that. We went into it with the mindset of fostering, said we'd be open to adoption, and then we got Jade and Lily because they wanted to make sure they were in a home that was willing to adopt, so that way they wouldn't have to move them again, which that makes complete sense to me. So then they were placed with us in March of 2014. They started asking us if we would be open to adoption asking us more questions about being open to adoption at the end of 2014 because it was actually going to termination. We thought about it. We said yes, that we would be open to it. And then we got a surprise phone call it was in January of 2015 that Jade and Lily's birth mom was pregnant and she really wanted us to take the baby. So we sat down and talked about it. She thought at the time that she was actually in labor in that moment, went to the hospital, found out she wasn't. And then what happened was we had said yes, we would take the baby. And so then she did end up delivering in February. So only a month later, she ended up delivering in February of 2015. I got to be in the room. I got to cut Gavin's cord, and she did ask us what we wanted to name him. So we had already come up with a name, and then she ended up putting our last name on the birth certificate, and we were not expecting that. The caseworker called me and told me, which that was so neat of her to do that. So Gavin has actually always been a Conley on his birth certificate, and we didn't have to do any changing of his name at adoption time. So that is just like a real quick, brief overview. We got placement of Gavin right straight from the hospital. He did have to stay in the NICU for a couple weeks, and that just was because he was premature and he was having a hard time feeding, and so they kept him there to make sure that he was getting all of the nutrition he needed. And then a couple weeks later he was doing fine and he got to be released from the hospital. So we went and picked him up, and we did during that time go up to the NICU and spend every day with him. And so that was neat that we were able to do that and then bring him home a couple weeks later. It then was almost 11 months later, and we were finally able to adopt all 3 children together. And once Gavin was born, they just decided to add him to their foster care case. And then we had to get rights terminated. She ended up relinquishing. We were able to adopt all 3 of them. And it was January of 2016 that the 3 of them were adopted. So that is just like a real brief glance over of our very first adoption story. We do have more details like about everything in there that we've filmed a couple different times. So I think there's 2 stories on our channel that cover that specific adoption story, which is our very first adoption story. What I want to share with you though today is really the details that I have never shared except with family. So the very first thing is that when they asked us if we would be willing to, if we would be open to adoption, and we said yes, it kind of like got the gears turning in my mind. And so I was like, they had mentioned that there were children out there waiting to be adopted. And this is something I had never even thought of really. And I guess I don't know why you would, but when they mentioned it, I was like, wow, really? So there are children that have their rights terminated, but they are not in an adoptive home, or they don't have an adoptive home. And so what they do, and this kind of sounds really wrong. I understand why they do it, I guess, but it just kind of is like, ugh. So they have a website that you can go to, and you can see all of the kids that are waiting for an adoptive home in every state. So I went out there and I looked it up. I went out to see what is this all about? Who are these kids? And I went out to the website and I took a look, and that's really when I started getting excited about doing adoption. I was like, oh my gosh, look at all these kids that need a home. At that point, then it was kind of put on my heart that adoption was probably something that I was going to want to do. Now, I had only considered fostering because when I was a teenager, foster care and adoption had touched my life in many different ways. I actually had a friend who was adopted. I had my mom had a cousin who I guess would be like my second cousin. She was adopted. I had a neighbor who fostered large sibling groups, and I also had a friend in high school. He was in the foster care system. So foster care and adoption had touched my life so much that I think it just made my heart open to it, and it made it something that I really wanted to do when I got older. And then when I got older, it was still something I really was passionate about, still am to this day. And then I was lucky enough, because I didn't ever ask Sean, but I was lucky enough to get a husband who was open to it too. So that was great. Okay, so details. So I did go out and I looked up this website, and actually how it goes is not every state, but almost every state has their own website, and then this one website takes all of those and compiles them together, and you can go out and you can find all of the children in every different state that is available right now for adoption. And it's probably not every child, but I would say it's probably a lot of them. And they have to go through certain criteria to be able to even be listed on the site. The parental rights have to be terminated. There are other criteria. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I just know that parental rights have to be terminated for them to be on there. That was one thing that I've never really shared with anyone, that we went into it only wanting to foster, but after they mentioned that, I got really excited about adoption and went out and started looking at the kids that were waiting, and then it made me want to do it even more. And so I was excited when Jade and Lily were placed with us because they were looking for an adoptive home. And so then, even though for the child, and you have to think about that, for the child, it's very sad. You know, their excitement is not going to match yours. And so just keep that in mind. The next detail that I want to share with you, I want to give you a little bit of background. I've said this a lot. We don't really talk a lot about faith on our channel. I do have a huge heart for God. I have a ton of faith. And I wanted to tell you what happened to me that brought me to that point. As a teenager, I had some faith. I did have some doubts, but I always came back to the fact that I was a believer. And from a teenager until like in my early 20s, my faith was just that. But it did grow, I think, a little bit. I didn't have any more doubts. In my early 20s, I went to the grocery store one day. I was in line, and at this time, I didn't have a ton of money. Okay, so I was struggling. I went through the grocery line, I checked out, and then I went to go put my groceries in bags, and there was a lady that was checking out behind me. She was not able to use her debit card for whatever reason, and I had this message, I guess, take over me that said, you need to go pay for her groceries. And I kept arguing with myself because I'm like, if I go pay for her groceries, I'm not going to have enough money to pay for the other stuff that I need to pay for this month. And that is where I think it always makes me want to cry because in that moment, I didn't have faith. And I feel to this day so guilty about not having faith because I know 100% that if I would have went and paid for her groceries, God would have found a way to get me the money that I needed to pay for the rest of my stuff. You know, things happen, like they don't just get like dropped in your lap, but kind of. And I had things happen to me before this that showed me that God was going to provide for me. That if I didn't have enough money, like I would randomly get checks in the mail for things. I knew that I should have faith, but in that moment I was really scared and I didn't have faith. I kept having this feeling like this push to go pay for her groceries, and I didn't pay for her groceries. And I went home and I told Sean, and I felt so bad that I didn't. From that day forward, I have always said that I don't care what God tells me to do. I don't care what it looks like to the outside world. I don't care who talks about me like, oh, they shouldn't be doing this or that. Or if God tells me to do something, I'm going to do it. Because in that moment, I knew that I never wanted to feel that way again. I think it was my own guilt. I don't think God was making me feel guilty. I think it was my own guilt. I knew I should have had faith. I didn't have faith. And I should have helped the person that I was meant to help. And I didn't. From that day, there has not been another day that I have not done what God asked me to do. So it was probably about 5 or so months before we found out about Gavin. I was thinking to myself like, I wonder, should we foster anymore? So we had Jade and Lily. They were talking to us about adopting them. We were open to the idea, and I thought, I wonder if we should just close our license or should we foster more children? So I happened to be in the Walgreens parking lot, and I sat in my car. I prayed. And I said, okay, God, what do you want us to do? Like, what's meant for us? And when I pray, I usually will say, God, I know that your plan for me is bigger and better than any plan I have for myself. I know I'll be happier doing it your way. So I want to do whatever it is your plan is. So God spoke to me and said that we were going to foster at least one more child, that this child is going to be a boy. If we wanted to at that point, we could be done. About 5 months later, we found out that Jade and Lily's birth mom was pregnant. They asked us if we were supposed to take it, or they asked us if we wanted to take the baby. I said to Sean, if it's a boy, then God told me that he was coming. And she did get an ultrasound the day she thought she was in labor. She did get an ultrasound, and we had confirmation it was in fact a baby boy. And so I said, God told me about him. We are supposed to take him. He's meant to be ours. And if we want to at that point, we can stop. Okay, so this must have been right after we found out about Gavin. We were trying to come up with a name. And Sean and I just have the hardest time coming up with names for kids because we have like such different taste in names. And so it's really hard for us to come up with things. And you wouldn't think like, we have had a lot of children that we have named. So it doesn't seem like it's maybe that impossible, but we have to go through this big whole thing. It takes us months usually. So we sat down and we were trying to come up with names and we could not come up with anything. We talked about what he liked, what I liked. I happened to be downstairs in our basement. I got this like aha moment, right? Where I'm like, I'm thinking it's God speaking to me again about what to name the baby. I hear his name is supposed to be or going to be Gavin Michael. And it was not more than 5 minutes and my phone rang and it was Sean. And Sean said, I know what we're naming the baby. And I said, oh, you do, huh? What are we naming him? And he said, Gavin Michael. And I said, oh my gosh, that's the name that just came to me. And I thought, oh, how cool was that? I got the message that that was his name. And 5 minutes later, Sean calls me on the phone and tells me the exact same name. And I was like, well, obviously that was meant to be. He was meant to be Gavin Michael. Later on down the road, right, we have Jade, Lily, Gavin, and then Christian comes along. With Christian, we weren't like 100% sure if she was pregnant, but she did reach out to us. She said she was. She asked if we would take the baby. We said yes. And so then we just kind of waited because we didn't know how far along she was, if she was pregnant. We ended up getting a phone call that she had had the baby, and so then we started doing an ICPC because he was born in Iowa, and at the time we lived in Nebraska. With Christian's birth, though, she ended up calling 911, got picked up by an ambulance to take her to the hospital, and Christian happened to be born in the ambulance, which is so crazy that they didn't even make it to the hospital in time, and that's where he was born. So, and he was fine and healthy and everything, but so interesting, you know, and I do know that that can happen with your pregnancies that you have like later on. With each baby, they come a little bit faster. Apparently he came real quick because they had to deliver him in the ambulance, and what an interesting story for him when he's old enough to understand his birth story. Another thing that I can't remember if I've ever shared this before or not. So when Logan was born, so after we have Jade, Lily, Gavin, Christian, and then Logan came along. And Logan is actually the last child in that sibling group that we have. So Logan came, and we were going to try really hard to get him a name on his birth certificate. I don't know if you know, but when a child is born, their parents do not name them. They become baby boy or baby girl. So baby is their first name, boy or girl is their middle name, and then they use the parents' last name, and they know that because when that person has checked into the hospital, they have to give their name, so then they use that last name. So with Christian was baby boy. We did not want that to happen to Logan. We did not want him to have to be baby boy, and so we were trying really hard to get him a name on his birth certificate. But now keep in mind, she is the biological parent, and at the time, you know, she still has her rights. So I thought it may end up being impossible to put a name on his birth certificate because technically, like, right, we have no rights at all, other than she did usually say to them that she wanted the child to be adopted. What ended up happening with Logan is we gave them the name that we wanted. We were told by the caseworker that we would not be able to put the name we wanted on the birth certificate. I can't remember how old he was, maybe 6 months old or so. They ordered the birth certificate and figured out that they did actually, in fact, get the name put on the birth certificate. And so the caseworker didn't even know that, which is crazy. But what ended up happening was they knew that she was not a good advocate for herself. And so they had her birth mom step in for her and become her advocate. And then her birth mom knew that we wanted this particular name. And so she was able to ask the hospital to put that on the birth certificate, and they in fact were able to do that. And so he was not baby boy, and he did get named at the hospital, which we named him Gabriel Logan Conley. That's what we thought we wanted to name him. We had not seen him. When we saw him for the first time, we ended up thinking he looked way more like a Logan Gabriel instead, which ended up following our naming pattern that we had going. All of our boys' first names end in N. And then I did notice that all of our boys' middle names were biblical. We ended up saying, wow, he looks way more like a Logan. So at adoption, we just flipped it and we changed his name from Gabriel Logan to Logan Gabriel. And then it ended up following our naming pattern. And somebody mentioned that to me in the comments after we had already changed it and we had introduced him as Logan Gabriel. I believe that's when it was. Or maybe it was when we did our name video. I guess I can't remember for sure. It was so interesting to me that we were actually able to get the name put on the birth certificate and that the caseworker didn't even know that that had happened. Okay, last little detail is, so for Gavin's initials are GMC. I'm sure you know is a car brand. Brianna's initials are BMW. So again, a car. And so we have the two cars in our family. And then, so crazy, during the COVID thing, that's when Christian was born. So he was born in 2020 in March, and we named him Christian David Conley, not even realizing that his initials are CDC, which was part of that whole thing. And so I thought that was interesting. It's like, wow, how did that happen? We didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't until later on that I was looking at kids' initials and I'm like, oh my gosh, how weird that happened. So, okay, those are really all of the details that I've never shared with anybody except for family. I hope you found some of them interesting. If you are interested in finding out more about like our actual adoption story, our very first adoption story, then I will link down below, and maybe I'll do it as like a pinned comment. The other two videos that we have, I'm pretty sure we have two, where we talk about this first adoption story. And one of them, oh, it's so cringy. It was like one of my very first videos we ever did on this channel, which has been like 5.5 years ago. And I watched that video and I'm like, ooh, look at me. I did not know how to talk to a camera. Yeah, it's not good. But I will link it here just in case you want to go back and watch. I probably share different things in that video than I share in the one that Sean and I did together. So I'll go ahead and link them both, but give me some grace on that first one. So I hope you found it interesting, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.